What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we're going to be going over a really fun mechanic, which is Scorpion's spear throw, or essentially that move that everyone knows as get over here. So let's hop into this right away because there's a lot we have to do today. And so when we come into the game, we're going to have a command that we can use that will summon a spear, which I'm using a default asset for, play some animations, and I'm going to explain it while we go through the process. So I have to press backward, forward, heavy within the given number of frames. I missed my given number of frames, so I did that instead. But do backward, forward, heavy, like that. You can see I throw a bridge component, I believe is what it actually is, but this is essentially representing my spear in this case, and the red box is the hitbox, so what we can actually collide with. Now I'm jumping over it with player 2, and you see once the spear is missed, then the character goes back to their idle animation. But let's say they actually collide with this spear throw. It is going to grab the opposing character, bring them to the character that used the attack, and put them in the dazed state. So let's watch that again. So I'm going to grab them, pull them in, and then be able to attack them at this point. And this is the get over here move from Mortal Kombat. And we can do it from the other way as well. And there we go. There are a lot of things we have to take into account, especially considering the different animation and different combo states that the characters get put in during this process. Quickly, before we get started, I would love to give a huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. And if you're interested in supporting the channel and getting a lot of perks, such as getting this template for free when it's released on the Epic Marketplace, please feel free to click this link in the top right corner of this video, which will lead you to the Patreon so you can check out all the benefits. If you want to check out everything we've done in the fighting game tutorial series to get to this point, so you can see the input stacks, the hitboxes, the different modes, the attacks, the command buffer, all that good stuff, you can go ahead and click this iCard in the top right corner right here. Otherwise, if you only care about the Scorpion get over here spear throw move, then you can click this iCard right here, which will allow you to check out where we implemented the daze setup in the previous episode. That daze state is essentially what happens when the character is hit by the spear and brought to the attacker. They cannot move in this state, they cannot do anything in this state, they can press it, but they're just sitting there stunned until either they are able to exit the stun due to time, or if they're actually hit and comboed out of it. With all that out of the way, let's get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be kind of hopping all over the place, but most of it is going to be in the blueprints today because we're dealing with a lot of logic in the animation blueprint and the projectile itself. So let's go into the blueprints and let's go into our data table that we have, which is for our mutant command data. And essentially these are all my attacks that I can use, all my different inputs I can use to perform commands. And so we have simple ones like our light attacks, and then we also have other ones like our dashes and our directional attacks. In this data table, we're going to want to add a new row to the data table and fill out the information, and that is for our get over here command. So I've called it get over here. But once you make a new row, you'll have all these options that you have to fill out. You have to fill out everything in the structure. So for the row name, you can set this by right-clicking and renaming. And I just called it get over here. But the name of the actual command is also get over here. Then for the input types, I have 3 input types that I've added. And they're backward, forward, and my special attack. You can see that I have to be in no state to perform this, and I don't go to a state when I'm finished performing it. I don't use any meter when performing this move. I have 30 frames between pressing these inputs to perform that command. I don't have to hold any inputs for any number of frames. I can't cancel out of it. I don't have an auto combo related to it. The description can just be related to the command itself. This is more for the command list. You can fill it out if you want. And startup, active, and recovery frames you can also fill out if you want. I don't technically need them the way I set up the days, but you probably should set them. That way the player knows what it is that has happened when that collision box hits them. It's not actually required for the logic today though, so set that up at your discretion. The video path is for the demo in the command list, and the character class is the character that can perform it. So if you've been following the series, you should be familiar with this process, and that is my command that I've created for today's episode. Now, on top of creating the command itself, we need to create a hitbox that we want to use for it. So I've gone into my mutant HB data, which is mutant hitbox data. Basically, this data table holds all of my hitbox data for all of my different commands. And so I have made a new one for the get over here. Called it get over here hitbox 1, just in case we want to add more hitboxes to it. Don't think we should ever need them. Regardless, though, you have the opportunity if you do want it. So I've added a new row to this data table. I've renamed the row to be called get over here hitbox 1. The hitbox type is projectile. That is important. It's not a proximity. It could be considered a strike, but I want it to actually move with our default projectile logic. So I'm not going to use strike. It's not a throw and it's not a hurt box, so we're going to set it to projectile. Now the height you can change to your liking. High is fine in this case because it's not overhead. So it's your choice between low and high. I think high is perfect for this. And these will most likely have to change later once you can see it in action. But this is my transform for my hitbox, so where it's going to spawn based on where the projectile is. You'll notice that the hitbox on the spear projectile was a lot smaller than the projectile itself, and that's because if they jump over the actual sharp point on the spear, I want them to avoid the attack, just like in Mortal Kombat when Scorpion uses his move. So the projectile mesh that I used was much bigger, but I have offset the hitbox to be at the point that I actually want to trigger collision. Also updated the scale to be a little bit smaller, about half the size of our standard hitbox size. Did apply a sound effect when this collides with the opponent. And then I've set up my damage. Hit stun, block stun, pushback, and launch are not required for this since it is such a specific attack that we're performing, but if you want to utilize them for any reason, by all means do it. And then you have all your other parameters like should cause, ground bounce, hard knockdown, daze, hit stun decay, damage decay, and should attach. We don't technically need to attach here. We are doing a similar process to the attach, but we don't have to attach here. This is the opposite. We are attaching the opponent to the hitbox to drag them back. As you can see here, I actually checked should ignore hit stun decay, but that's not required. I was just playing around with some stuff, so I'm going to uncheck that now. You could actually put damage decay in here, and it would make sense with the current system without any other adjustments if you do want that, so feel free to consider that. We don't need to cause daze in this case because we're not actually triggering the daze as soon as the collision occurs, but again, you could set that boolean and play around with it if you want to use it that way. At this point, our data tables are set up, so we have our command, we can actually trigger it, and we have the hitbox that we want to spawn. We want to go into our animation blueprint and actually create the animation for it in the state machine. We've got a lot of logic in the animation blueprint, but the good thing is we don't have to worry about too much of this. So we have idle to our commands, and basically we can perform a command if the command on the character is set to has used command. This is a boolean that we set in the code when the proper inputs have been pressed and added to the input buffer, and when checked against the command list, we determine we have performed this command. And so we're going to do that same thing for get over here. Now, since we already have that command in the data table, we're good to go. We don't have to do anything with it, but we do need to know the index of the command. So in the data table, it starts at index 1, but really this is index 0 because we add all these to an array in the character blueprint, and the character is responsible for holding on to all this information. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. You can see whatever the row is here is one higher than the actual index that we're going to want on the character commands array. And so if I scroll down to my bottom one here, get over here, that's index 26, but really that is going to be index 25 in the array. So we need to do the same logic we were doing for our other commands, but in this new state, and we're going to use index 25 for that command. So we can right click and add a new state. Once you do that, you'll get this box, and I've called it command in parentheses get over here. The state doesn't have any events on it, so we're safe there. If we go into the state itself, mutant get over here is the animation I'm using, and it looks like this. So this is a Mixamo animation that I'm using, and it is pretty close to throwing a spear. The mutant is just throwing his hand out, throwing something over there. That's the start of when we want to actually throw the spear. You can see I have an anim notify to represent that exact moment, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. So this is the animation I'm playing, and I've made sure to set it not to loop. And once we do that, now we have our state with the animation. We can drag from idle into command get over here. And once you do that, you'll get a transition rule, and it looks like this. Inside of the transition rule, we do exactly what I was just saying. So we're going to grab our character reference. This is what has the character commands array. So we can drag off of that and get the character commands array. We can drag off the character commands array and get a reference. And we want to pass in the proper index. We know that index 25 is the get over here. Remember, it says row 26, but it starts at index 1, whereas our array will start at index 0, so we want to use index 25. And then we want to break the command. And once you do this, you'll have all these different options that are in your command structure that we've set up in previous episodes. We really only need the has used command, and we can plug it into the result that can enter transition here. If we do that, you can then click on your break command and hide the unconnected pins, which will get rid of any pins that are not in use. Of course, you can enable them again by checking them, but we won't need them. So I'm going to remove that logic just because I don't need a duplicate, but this is the logic you should have right here. And once you do that, you'll now be able to go from idle to this animation when you press the proper inputs to perform that command. So that's step 1. Now, additionally to performing that command, we want to do our basic attack logic. Whenever we start triggering a command, I always call start attack transition. Again, this is something that we've done throughout the series. It's not new to this episode. So if you watched any episodes in the series, you'll know what it is. But if you don't know what it is, essentially it sets my states correctly. It stops me from being able to move. It keeps track of the command that I used. It pulls the proper data, things like that. And so my start transition event is going to be the start attack transition. And you'll see that the other commands have these in here. So if you have followed any of the other episodes with these, you should have them. We're just going to do the same thing here. Perfect. So now we can fully go from idle to the spear throw. And once we do that, we want to spawn the spear. So now going back into the animation that we're playing here, we want to add an anim notify of when we want to actually create the projectile. So you can use this little scrubber to go back and forth between your animation, and I recommend whatever looks the most natural is where you want to spawn the spear. I have picked frame 65 or somewhere around there to spawn my spear. Once you have the frame you want to spawn it on, go ahead and right click in the notify track section here and add notify, new notify, and once you do this you'll name it, and then at that point you can just call it spawn spear or whatever custom name you want to give it. We will have to fill out this anim notify, but let's stay away from that for now. Let's finish the state machine first. So from the get over here command, we have to be able to reel in the attack, so do the other part where we're actually pulling the character that we hit back to ourselves, or we need to return to idle. So if we miss the spear, we want to return to idle. If we hit the opponent, we want to go to the reel in. So get over here, this is the startup, this is the throwing the spear, can go into get over here, reel in. So I've added a new state called get over here, reel in. And let me show you what that state looks like. So this is the animation, and it is basically just him pulling his arm back to his side, and essentially that is him pulling the character in with the spear, with the collided object that he threw. Of course, your animation probably will look better, so play around with it as needed to get the result you want. Make sure that this animation does not loop either. We only want to play it the one time. And to transition from command to get over here, reel in, we need to know that the other character was hit by the player's thrown spear. And a very simple way to do this is to add a combo state called speared. So we have all these combo states in our game. In the fighter template character in the code, we have this E combo state enum. And they do things like track stuns if we're in a wall or ground bounce, launched, knockdown, hard knockdown, in recovery, in a super. We added dazed in the previous episode, and now I've added speared as well. So you can add to your list here just whatever's your last entry, add a comma, add E_speared, and U meta display name equals, and then the name of the state. And I've just called it speared. So this is a specific state to this move, and once the spear collides with the opponent, they will be set into the speared state. Once the character is in the speared state, we can check on the other character for that player's combo state and see if it is speared, and if it is speared, we can play the corresponding animation, so we can be working with both characters at the same time to really play this at the correct times and only during the correct circumstances. And so to start reeling in the spear and perform that animation, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing my character reference, just like we did to perform the command. But this has an other player variable on it, and it is just a reference, a pointer to the other player, the other character. And so the attacker mutant is getting the defender mutant, or the speared mutant here with this reference. We want to check their combo state, and we want to check if it is equal enum to speared, and bring that into the result. If it is, then that means we can actually reel them in. They were hit by the projectile. It is time to reel them in. Now, this transition rule does not have any specific events, and the state itself doesn't have any events. So now, once the character does the reel in animation, they want to return to idle. Additionally, if they miss the spear, we want to return to idle. So let's take a look at both of those. Let's look at the reel in to idle first. So we have, get over here, reel in to idle. And I've set it to be automatic rule based on sequence player in state. This just means that once this animation is done, if it can't transition to anywhere else, it will return to idle. Now, when we take this transition, I am calling my end attack transition, which is very similar to the start attack transition event that we have. So you can see all my other commands when we return to idle. We call this end attack transition. I'm just doing the same thing here. Essentially, this will set me back to the regular attack state and allow me to move again. All that good stuff. So this is the reel in to idle, but we also need to check and make sure once they've thrown the spear, if they miss, they can return to idle, and that is right here. And so for this one, it's a little bit different. It's not automatic because we don't want to transition from the get over here state, the throw of the spear, to the idle when the animation ends. We want them to hang in that animation for a bit. If they have missed the spear and we can confirm that, we want to return them. But since the animation can finish before the spear has collided with the character, depending on the distance they are apart, we don't want to make it automatic rule based. So this transition rule is going to check if the attack state is equal to none. The attack state is an enum that we have in the code that we set up in earlier episodes. We have started, active, recovery, and then some special ones for grab. Started is the actual attack startup. Usually this is when we spawn a proximity box, but for projectile, it could be the actual startup of the move. Just no proximity box, just when we're starting up before the active hitbox is spawned. The attack active is when the active hitbox actually is available and can deal damage. And the recovery is after that point before returning to idle. So what's going to happen is we are going to be set into an attack state when we use the projectile, when we use the spear. And after a given number of frames, the attack state will be reset. That means that we haven't made a collision, and so we can return back to idle. Want to make sure we grab our character reference, the attack state enum, check equal enum, and we want to make sure that it is none. And pass that into your result. That's your transition rule. Now going back to it, I also have my end attack transition here on my start transition event, just like all my other commands. These are all the states in the state machine for the attacker, but we do need to do this for the defender as well. So if they get hit by the spear, where do we want them to go? And we want them to go to a speared state. So I only have this going from idle for now, but you'll probably want to do this from anywhere that the spear can interact with them. So if they get hit by the spear and they are not moving, great. If they get hit by the spear and they are walking, we'll want to count that too. For the ease of the tutorials, I have left them out. You should likely include them. Now, to go from idle to our new state, let's go ahead and make a new state. And I've called it speared by get over here. So add state. This is it right here. In here, I have my mutant speared state. And so there is an initial couple of frames here where they're hit and they kind of just get picked up by it. And then they're being brought over by it. This is the actual reel-in animation part of it. I don't want this animation to loop, so I've turned that off here. Now, idle to this transition is right here. And the way we enter this transition and go into this state is if we are the character that was speared. So you know how the get over here reel in was checking if the other player was the character that was speared? In this case, we want to check if we were speared. So idle to speared by get over here. Go into that transition rule. We're just grabbing our character reference combo state and checking directly for speared. Now, if you are, you'll go into this transition rule. There are no transition events on this transition, and there's also no events on the state itself. Now, once this speared by is finished, we do want to be able to go to the dazed state. We don't return to idle, we go into that dazed where they're just sitting there kind of spinning their head, they're confused, and that is a free attack for the attacker. At this point, we can go to the dazed state, which we set up in the previous episode. So just quick reminder, just looks like this. Just sitting there, head is spinning. But the speared by get over here should have a transition rule to this state that we have. And I did convert my idle to dazed transition rule to a shared rule, so we could use it for this one as well. So idle to dazed is basically just checking if the character's combo state is dazed. No events on that. But speared by get over here is using the same rule. You can tell by the colors, they match. And to convert a transition rule to shared, you can click on the rule that you want, so idle to dazed, go up to the transition rule sharing section, and hit promote to shared. So if I do it on a rule that is not shared, it'll say promote to shared. Go ahead and click that. You can then name it, so I called this one dazed. So then when I am going from my speared by get over here into the dazed state, I want to use the dazed state. So I can click on my speared to dazed, and then use shared, and then select dazed. This is what it looks like if you're not using a shared rule right now. You can just press this drop down that says use shared and select dazed. Again, no transition events and no events on the dazed state itself. At this point, now the attacker and the defender both can do all their animations related to the spearing and the get over here move. We need to fill out our spawn spear anim notify. So if we go into the event graph for the character that we're in, I have it right here, but you go anywhere in your graph that you want to do this logic, and you search for the name of the anim notify. So anim notify spawn spear, and you want the event. You'll get this node right here. So basically, once we throw the spear, we eventually reach this animation frame, and we reach this anim notify, and we will call this event. So at this point, we want to create our spear projectile, and we want to spawn it with the hitbox, attach them, all that good stuff. Now to do this, we need an actual spear projectile that we can spawn. So I'm going back to my project here. I'm going to my functional BPs. I have a projectiles folder, and I have a bunch of projectiles in here. I had one that I called proj_horizontal, which is just projectile horizontal. And this is technically just my fireball projectile. But really the fireball and the spear are quite similar. So we can use it as a base for our logic. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and right-clicked on proj horizontal and create child blueprint class. And then I've named it projectile spear. Alright, so now I have my fireball and my spear. And we won't really need the fireball for this episode. I'm just showing you this is where it's coming from. So all that's in the fireball is the spawn projectile event. And we're going to basically copy this exact logic and use it in the spear, but with a lot more logic as well. So I am now going to close out of the projectile horizontal, and I'm going to go directly into the spear. And let's go to the viewport and then take a look at everything that we set up here. So by default, our projectiles have this default scene route, and I have a particle system, which is if we want to have some sort of effect like the fireball did. I actually don't need the particle system on the spear, but feel free to use it if you want it. There's also static mesh on the projectile, and this one we do want to use. So I did not have a spear asset that I used, but I had this corner arch for a building, and I went ahead and put that in there. So that is what I'm using as my spear, but you have limited options that you can use if you don't import things. So you can just pick one for now. It doesn't matter what you choose, as long as you see it on the screen and you know what direction it's facing so that you can tell it's working. You can always update it later. I've also adjusted my transform a little bit, basically just my scale, so that I could get it to a size that I wanted. Change your materials if you want. And there you go. So now we have everything for this section that we could want for our spear. We also have a projectile movement component, and I don't adjust it from what was brought over from the proj horizontal or our fireball. But you can change them if you want to. Now let's go into the class defaults for the spear, and you want to make sure all your parameters are good in here as well. So I have some new parameters that I made. Don't bother with these just yet. I'll go over them in a few minutes. But your velocity is going to be how fast the spear moves. And the fireball was 800, so really I'm just using the same value that the fireball was using. But you can make it faster or slower. That's entirely up to you. Obviously, if this is a lower number like 200, it's going to be slower than a number like 800. You can have a hit effect if you want an actual effect when the spear collides with the opponent. It would look nice. I'm actually going to add one. I didn't have one in here, but might as well. Doesn't hurt anything. Let's use maybe the hit. KY hit. I know we use it for the Thunderball, but we'll just add it in here so you can see what it looks like. And then you have your attribute section, which are other parameters that we've added for our projectiles. So we have should be destroyed upon collision, which I don't want because when we collide with the opponent, we want to reel them in afterwards. So I'm not destroying it upon collision. I do want to display the hit effect, especially now that we've set one up. I don't allow it to be destroyed by durability or by melee. If another projectile collides with the spear, we don't want to actually damage it, and if a character uses a melee attack and times it properly and hits the projectile, we also don't want to let them damage it or destroy it. So I've disabled both of those. The lifetime is how long it is alive. It will be cleaned up once this amount of time passes. We will also clean it up when the animation is finished, when we're done everything we need to do with it. This is more useful for if it doesn't get cleaned up for any reason. Like if we miss the spear and it's just floating out into space, it doesn't take up memory forever. So don't make this a super high value, but 500 frames is less than 10 seconds. That's fine. And durability of -1, this just means that it can't be destroyed by damage. It doesn't have health. Everything else in here I've left alone. And now we have our basic spear logic. Now let's go into the event graph, and the first thing we want to do is make sure we override our spawn projectile. Now once you have this event spawn projectile here, you can either do what I've done here, or really we can just call the parent class's logic. So I had initially thought that I might have to change quite a bit about the spawn projectile, and so I wrote this logic out again and was waiting for things to add to it, but I ended up not needing that. So, since the fireball does all this logic for us, where it's determining the direction that we're facing, it is setting the projectile's movement and velocity proper based on the direction that we're facing, and then setting the rotation to that as well. And I want to do that for the spear. All that should be done for the spear. So going back to the spear projectile, instead of doing all this logic that I'm doing here, I can actually right-click on the event that we added and press Add Call to Parent Function. And this will call the parent's function for spawn projectile, which is proj horizontal. So it's going to do all this logic for us. And then we can clean this up quite a bit. Now, if we do this, we still need to be able to get the actor location for a variable that we're going to add. So we are going to have to do a little bit more than that. But I can delete all of this logic now. And so I can have spawn projectile call the parent spawn projectile. And we will still need to check the owner to see if it is of type fighter template character. But if it is, then we can do the remaining logic. So with that one node in place here, this has been cleaned up significantly. We have a lot less logic in our spawn projectile, and then we don't have duplicate logic that we have to keep editing in multiple places if we ever want to change that behavior. So this really is a better system. So with this done, let's go ahead and get into the specific logic that we need to add for the spear. I'm going to make 4 variables for the spear. The first one is a boolean called isReelsedIn, which you can add by pressing plus variable and setting the type to boolean. By default, it is false. The isReelsedIn is basically once the reel in has finished, so after the spear is already collided and after we brought the enemy to our position, this will be true. Then I have 3 float variables. I have reel in distance, spear user position, and max distance. So make these 3 variables and make them all float. Now, reel in distance is how close we want to pull the character that was speared to our position. We can either keep them a little bit farther away, or we could pull them all the way to colliding with us. The reel in distance is just a little bit of a buffer to give us information about where we should pull the character to. The spear user position is where the attacker was. This is useful for the spear because we can know if it is too far away from the attacker and we want to delete the spear, we want to destroy it and clean up all the data about it. Basically, the character has missed the spear attack. And the max distance is how far away the spear can go. Typically, it can go the whole way across the screen, but if it goes off the screen, then it's going too far away. It has missed. We're not going to track it any longer. Now, you could also do it where you throw the spear and it just comes back after a given amount of time. And at that point, you don't have to check a max distance because if there was no collision during that given amount of time and it's returned to the owner, which would be Scorpion, then, you know, the attack is over. You haven't actually speared the opponent. So you could do that as well. I just did it a little bit differently here with the max distance, but it really is up to you. Now, the additional stuff we have to do in the spawn projectile is basically just set the spear user position. Because as soon as the spear is spawned, we want to know where the attacker is standing. And to do this is pretty simple. We just need to get the owner of the spear. So get owner. And we want to cast it to fighter template character. It's not really required that you do this cast, because something else could be using the spear, but I'm trying to make sure that this is the only character using the spear if we're going to do this logic. Then you can drag off the cast node and get the actor location, which will get their current location. From here, you can right-click on the return value and split the struct pin to get all the values. We have X, Y, and Z. If we go to our level, we can see Y is the horizontal axis, which is the axis we care about. So I want to use the Y value, and I want to set my spear user position variable to that value. If you want other things to be able to use the spear, say for example you have an AI that can use a spear and it's not a child of fighter template character, this will actually still work without it. So you can just do this logic if you want, where you have the get owner, get actor location, and set the spear user position. I'm actually going to do that because I thought of it while doing this voiceover, that we could have some uses for that. So I'm going to leave it like that instead. With the cast, it's perfectly safe. Without the cast, it does give us a few more options. So this is the spawn projectile of the spear. I also have two events that I want to add to the projectile spear as well. One is the tick function, and one is when we have actually speared a character. Let's do the speared character first. And to do that, we can just go anywhere in the graph, right click, and type add custom event. You'll get your event. I call it speared character. And I also have added an input parameter called speared character reference, so we know what character was speared. That way we can set appropriate data on that character, such as the combo state to speared. And to do this, we can click on the event that we made, add a new parameter, switch the type to be fighter template character. We're going to make it an object reference, and we can give it a name like speared ref. So this is all good. I have my speared character with that variable. And so this is when the spear has collided with the character. At this point, we want to determine what happens. The first thing I want to do when the spear collides with the character is stop the spear from moving. Stop the projectile movement on the spear. Because I want it to stay in place like it has stuck into the enemy. And this spear is technically a projectile. So I can grab my projectile movement component that I have, get it. I can then call a function stop movement immediately, and this will stop all projectile movement on the projectile movement component. So the spear will stop moving. It will sit in place. That's what we're doing here. Then I want to set the state of the character that was hit by the spear to the speared combo state. That will make them play the animation that we set up in the animation blueprint. So I'm going to drag off my speared character ref, set combo state, and I want to change this to speared. This is what we got so far. Now, I added an arbitrary 1 second time between being speared and being reeled in. This makes it feel a little bit better from a gameplay perspective, in my opinion, and also if your animation from the spear is still playing before they go into that being pulled toward them section, this will buy you some time to play that animation. Specifically in Mortal Kombat, when Scorpion spears an opponent, they do take a step or two back because it does add force into their body when it hits them, and so they have to step backward. Then he starts pulling them toward him. If you want this effect like I did, you can simply call a function, set timer by event, and you can set the time for how long you want. This is in seconds, so 1.0 is 1 second. I don't want it to loop. And then on the event, you can drag off of that and type add custom event. And once this timer is up, it will call this event. So that's what I've done here. And the event that I created was called reel in speared character. Now at this point, once we want to begin reeling in the character, what we have to do is attach the character to the projectile or to the hitbox, but one way or another, we need to attach the character to something that is moving. Easiest way for me to think of this is just attach the character to the spear. And to do that, we can call attach actor to actor. So when we call this function, attach actor to actor, we have the target that is being attached, and the parent actor is who it is being attached to. So the target, the one that we are attaching, is the speared character. The parent, which is what is going to actually be moving, is the spear, which is the self reference. So we can say self, get a reference to self, and pass in the spear as the parent actor. So the character that was speared is now a child of the spear. Could technically use a socket name if you have a more advanced asset than I do and attach them at a specific point to make it look cleaner. I don't have that, so I'm going to leave the socket name as none. The location, rotation, and scale rules should all be keep world in this case. So if you keep relative, it is going to use the spear's location, rotation, and scale to rotate the character. We don't want this for the location because we want where the character was speared to be where they're standing when they start getting reeled in. Otherwise, there might be a little bit of snapping. So keep world. We definitely want to snap the target because there will absolutely be snapping. With the relative, there will be snapping due to differences between the two. With the snap target, it will absolutely snap to the point that we give it. And with keep world, it will stay in place. So the character will stay where they're at. The rotation is the same deal here. The keep relative and the snap the target will rotate to be matching with the spear, but we don't want that. We want them to be facing the same direction that they were when they were speared. So we want to keep the world. And the scale is the same. It doesn't really apply here, but we definitely don't want to change it with the scale of the spear. So keep world is, again, the proper solution. Weld simulated bodies is also fine. And we'll get this node here. Now what I do is I apply the opposite force to pull the projectile back, moving the spear toward the attacker, moving it toward the character that had performed the spear throw. And to do that, I just do what we did to actually start the projectile movement. So in our fireball, proj horizontal, what we do is we determine the direction we're facing, then we use the velocity that we have and set the velocity and local space on the projectile movement. So going back to the spear, you can see we've done that same thing here using the velocity, but it's always at -1.0 because we always want to work off of the current rotation of the object and apply it that way. So our velocity by default is 800 on the Y, right there. And so it's always a positive value, but the spear is going to rotate based on what direction we are facing when we throw it. We always want the velocity to be negative in that case because it's either going to be negative and we're facing to the right, which will bring it toward us, or we've rotated the spear, which inverts the axes, and we want it to be negative so that when we're facing to the left, the spear will come at us to the right direction. And so we have velocity is a variable that we have on our projectiles. So velocity, and we want to multiply this vector times float, and we want to multiply it by -1.0, and we want to call set velocity in local space off of the projectile movement. So how I did it here will work, but also you can drag off your projectile movement and then get the set velocity in local space. Pass in the velocity that we just set up, and then plug it in. You'll get what I've got here. That will handle all of the actual movement for reeling in the character after they get speared. We also need to take into account if they miss the spear, and also we need to know how long we should reel in the character for. And those are going to be done in our tick function. So I have my tick function here. When you open up this blueprint for the first time, you should have begin play, actor begin overlap, and tick. I just use my tick from there. I don't need the begin play or begin overlap. But if you delete that event already or you don't see it, you can just simply search for event tick and get it onto the screen here. Alright, so tick runs every frame, and every frame we want to check for certain conditions. The first thing we want to check against is to see if the spear has missed. Essentially, if the spear has gone too far away from the character that used it, it is not able to hit the opponent at this point, so it has missed. At this point, we can just get rid of it. We can destroy it, clean up the hitboxes, all that good stuff, and set the character that was the attacker back to their idle state. And to do this, we can check the actor location of the spear, get actor location, and split the struct pin to get the X, Y, and Z value of it. We only care about the Y. And to get the distance of an object, you can subtract them both and get the absolute value. That's typically the easiest way. So we can take Y minus float, and we want to use the spear user position. So the attacker that created the spear, grab their Y position. Then we drag off of that result and type absolute float. This is the absolute value of that operation, which is how many units apart these two objects are. If it is less than the max distance, float less than float, then we know it is not far enough away to destroy it yet. But if it is greater than or equal to the max distance, it is far enough away and we want to destroy the spear. So this is the logic I have here. Now you'll notice that the reel in distance and the max distance are both parameters that I have that we haven't set any default values for, but we also haven't set them. So is reeled in was set to false, spear user position was defaulted to 0. But max distance and reel in distance actually need default values. You'll probably have to play around with these to get them how you want them. But the real in distance is going to be how far away the character is going to get brought to the attacker. I chose 180. I thought that was a good number. If this is smaller, the characters will be closer together at the end of the reel. And if it is bigger, the characters will be farther apart at the end of the reel. The max distance is how far the spear has to get before we destroy it, because we assume that it was missed or otherwise cannot complete its operation, and thus it won't hit the character and spear them. I've set a default value of 1000 on the max distance. Make sure you do set these both, otherwise this first check won't function as intended. Now I brought the result of the max distance and the distance check into a branch. Remember, if it's true that the distance is less than the max distance, we can go on to other things. But if it's false, we want to destroy the spear. And so let's actually deal with the false first because it's simpler. And we'll finish it before we get into the other topics. So if it's false, like I said, we want to destroy the spear and we want to set the character back to their default state. So at this point, we want to grab the owner of the spear. And we do want to cast it to our fighter template character yet again. This time it's important that we cast it because we want to grab the attack state enum off of it. We want to set the attack state back to none. This is super important because this is what is in the animation blueprint that allows us to return from the command get over here, which is where we throw the spear, to idle. Remember, the attack state has to be none. This is where that is set. That's where this comes into play. Now, there is more logic that it does, but this logic is going to be explained in the next part. So let's just skip this for now. Just do this for now, and then we'll go to the true branch. Basically, we don't have to destroy the spear. It is not above the maximum distance yet. What we need to do now is determine if we should keep reeling in the opponent or if we're ready to get rid of the spear in the hitbox. And to do this, we want to get all of our attached actors because the spear has a hitbox attached to it and it also has the character that was speared attached to it. So we can get the attached actors and leaving reset array checked is fine. And we have this out actors array, which is any actors that are attached to it. We can drag off of the out actors and type for each loop with break. And this will allow us to loop through them all, but we can also stop the loop early if we need or want to. Now, I want to cast and check if this attached actor is the fighter template character, because it could be the hitbox, so we don't want to make any assumptions. Just like that. And that's how we get these 3 nodes. So every attached actor, we're going to loop through them, and at each one, we're going to cast it to the fighter template character. If the cast succeeds, we can go on and do this logic here. And this logic is going to be the distance check for when we should stop reeling in the speared character. We already did a distance check for the max distance, but we haven't done a distance check for how far we should reel the character in. So dragging off of our fighter template character cast that we have here, we can get their location. Get actor location. Remember, this actor that I have, that I just set up, is the speared character. So we're going to get their actor location. And of course, we only want their Y value. We're only worried about horizontal values. We're going to do the same distance formula that we just did. So float minus float. And we want to check the spear user position. So basically, we're checking each character and how far apart they are. Then we need to grab the absolute value and float. So we have the absolute value. So the absolute value just makes it positive. If this was a negative value, it wants to return a positive value because all distances are positive. They don't have a direction. And then we want to check and see if this is less than or equal to the real in distance. All right, and that's what we're doing right here. And the reason for this is if the distance between these two characters is less than or equal to the real in distance, which for me is 180, that means they're at the point they need to be. The character that was speared no longer has to be brought any closer to the attacker. We want to drop them off at this point. So I bring this into a branch. If it is true, they are within that distance. If it's false, they are not, and we don't need to do anything. We just want to let it keep doing this check every tick. If it's true, that means we are ready to detach the actor, the character, from the spear. And to do that, you see I have my fighter template character, cast, reroute nodes. Remember, this is just the speared character reference. So I drag off my speared character reference and I type detach from actor. Then you can set the location, rotation, and scale rules. Like when we were attaching, we want to set them all to keep world because, again, we want them to keep what they had last. We don't need them to update to their new parent, or because they were detached from the sphere, we don't need them to change. We just want them to keep what they were already at. We already have it set up looking how we'd expect. So detach from actor, and then using that same character reference, now that the character is no longer speared, we want to set them into the dazed combo state. This will allow them to go from the speared by get over here into the dazed animation. At this point, we want to set our boolean is reeled in to be true. If we do this, we'll know that we've successfully completed the reel in, and we can gracefully close out and delete the spear information. Then I drag off of the set here, and I bring it all the way around into the break of the for each loop with break. This will stop us from looping through any other attached actors and will allow us to complete the loop. At this point, we check to see if is reeled in is true, and if it is, we go and clean up the hitbox and the spear itself. I'll get into this in a minute, but make sure you understand why this is reeled in had to be set to true. This is running on tick, so it's running every frame. When we're looping through this, we could easily complete the loop each frame and not be close enough distance. The character has not been reeled in yet, so we don't want to destroy the hitbox or the spear before this point. But once the loop completes and this is true, we know we can delete these things. So if is reeled in returns true in this branch, then we can destroy and clean up the information. So what we want to do is get our attached actors again. I'm using the same node that I was, and I'm doing another for each loop with break. And I'm just going to find the hitbox actor, and if I can find it, I'm going to destroy it and exit out of the loop. We don't want to destroy the character or anything related to the character. They're already detached. We just want to make sure that the attached actor we're looking at here is the hitbox actor and destroy it. So again, get attached actors, for each loop with break, drag off the array element, cast to hitbox actor, and then drag off of as hitbox actor and call destroy actor. This will destroy the hitbox if it is found. Then you don't want to typically remove elements in an array while you're in a loop. So since we've now destroyed this, we want to break out of the loop. We're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to bring it from here, bring it around into the break on the for each loop with break. And then at this point on the completed, we want to call destroy actor, which is finally going to remove the spear itself. Now, this works after the character is reeled in, but we need to also do this if the spear is far enough away from the character. So before, when I said there was a little bit more we have to do, that's what I was talking about. So after we set the attack state of the character to none, we want to do the same logic that we just did where we destroyed the hitbox and the spear. So I'm using the exact same logic. I just brought some reroute nodes here and connected them here so that I could do this logic. At this point, the projectile spear is fully set up and we're good to go, but we need to determine when this collision actually occurs, as well as actually spawning this projectile. The whole reason we got off on this tangent and filling out this projectile is because we needed to spawn a class and we did not have one. So let's go back into the mutant and a BP, go back to the event graph and to our spawn spear function. At this point, we can now spawn this projectile spear, and that's what we're going to want to do. So spawn actor from class, and we want to pick our proj_spear. Now I use my player transform because that is the owner of this animation blueprint, and that's where I want the spear to start. But the actual owner, you can click this down arrow to expose it, and we want to use the character reference for the owner. So this is the transform of the character, and this is the actual character. Alright, so we've spawned our spear right here. And now we want to get the data of the mutant hitbox data for this attack. And we want to pass that data along when creating the actual projectile itself. So we spawn the actor, but we need to set all the parameters for it. And to do this, we can right click and get data table row. From here, you select the data table. It's okay to hard code here and pick the mutant hitbox data because this is the only one we're ever going to need for this event. And then for the row name, you pick the row that you want, which is the get over here hitbox 1. You can drag off of the out row and type break to get all the data for it. And then press the down arrow to expand it into all your parameters. That's what we have here. And now, only if the row is found, we want to call our create projectile hitbox, which is a function we made when we initially set up projectiles in this series. We have create projectile hitbox right here. We can call it. At this point, we want to pass in all the parameters and fill out all the variables for this function. And they pretty much all come from the broken hitbox data here. You could manually put in some if you wanted, but it's not required for this. So I take my break hitbox data and I just pass them into the corresponding fields. So we have our projectile reference, which is coming from the actual actor that we spawned, the return value. Then we have the hitbox type, height, transform, sound, damage, hit stun frames, block stun frames, pushback distance, launch distance, should cause daze, should ignore hit stun decay, should ignore damage decay. I don't have any projectiles that cause ground bounce or hard knockdown at the current time, but if you've added that already, you can do that, or you could go ahead and add it now if you want to. This episode's already long, so I'm going to skip it for now, as it's not required. And then in create projectile hitbox, it will do what it has always done. There's no changes required for this. After the projectile hitbox was spawned, we want to call spawn projectile as well. Spawn projectile is what we set up in projectile spear. So we're going to officially start this process after we spawn the actor and attach the hitbox and set all the parameters. To call it, we just drag off of our return value. See, I have these reroute nodes. This is the projectile spear object reference that we created. We call our spawn projectile function. Now on this anim notify, we will create the spear, attach the hitbox, and start the spear logic. The last thing that we need to do is look out for the collision between the hitbox on the spear and the character. To do that, we can go to our hitbox actor BP, and I have an event called check projectile collision, and that's what we're going to want to do the collision for the projectile spear in. So this logic is very complicated, and there's a lot going on, and I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm only going to go through what is necessary. So long story short on this event, we get the overlapping actors of the hitbox, and we determine if the hitbox is active, and if it is, we make sure that it is a projectile type. If that's the case, we know that we want to actually handle this logic, so we determine if it is projectile to projectile collision, or if it's collided with a static mesh of some sort. If it's collided with a static mesh, we can assume that it's a character, an assist, or something like that, so we want to do different logic. If it does cast to a static mesh component, we grab the tags and we see that it is a hurt box that the static mesh component was. In this case, it is right for us to assume that we can check to see if it is a character, so we cast to see if it is related to our fighter template character. Then we check to see and make sure that it is not the owner, so we can't hurt ourselves with our own projectile. If this is also true, then we call the collide with projectile hitbox function on the character. We call take damage and do all that logic. Then we deactivate the hitbox so we don't just continuously deal damage on them. And we disable the collision with the projectile. We cast to see if we should display the hit effect and if it should be destroyed. And right here at the very end of all that logic, okay, we just went through all that logic, all the way at the very end here. We were checking to see if it should be destroyed upon collision. If it's true that it should have been destroyed upon collision, we were destroying it. But if it's false, I was checking to see if we were a spear or not, if the projectile was a spear or not. The reason I'm calling it here is because I know that we can't destroy it by melee, as well as it doesn't actually have durability. We can't damage it. We don't need to check for any other things in that logic that we know are never going to be the case, so we don't need to check for the spear there. This logic could be a spear, and so I want to check for it here. You could check for other places. I'm not going to make it more complicated than it is. You could check for other places, but I decided not to. I just ruled out anything that I knew I wasn't going to ever use the spear for. I don't want to check for it there. It'll also increase our performance not checking for it where we don't need it to be. So this false was previously empty. What I've done is add a cast to the projectile spear. And if the cast succeeds, we're going to call our speared character event that we made in that class. Now, what we're casting to the projectile spear is this object here. It is the object that we were calling destroy actor on, which is our projectile. So if I follow this, is right here, the get attached parent actor. So the actor that the hitbox is attached to is the spear, and that's what it will return here. So I have reroute nodes this whole way, and I'm casting that to the projectile spear. Now, off of the projectile spear, I can simply type speared character and call that function. But it needs a speared character reference, and I have that as well. The speared character reference is coming from the static mesh that we had picked up on that we collided with. And remember, we casted the owner of that static mesh to the fighter template character right here. So I'm going to do a little bit of fancy work here to clean this up. Alright, so after cleaning this up, this is what it looks like. So let's follow this line back. So we have this check where we're checking to see if we collide with a static mesh component, and if we did, we were checking to see if it was a hurt box. Then we were getting the owner of the hurt box and casting it to a fighter template character. This is the character reference that we want to pass in because this is the character that would be speared if this is the case. So following this blue line that I have, I brought it all the way over to the speared character. So we're calling speared character with this projectile spear using that fighter template character cast. Now there's one other thing we need to do. I know we've already done a lot, but that fighter template character is only valid if we follow this path. It is possible for this cast to the static mesh component to fail. If the cast fails, we have logic down here to check to see if we're using complex hurt boxes, which are essentially 3D hurt boxes and not the standard 2D hurt boxes. If this is the case and we are using complex hurt boxes, we have to check the logic a little bit differently. We still do the same check to make sure that we can actually hit this, but then we cast to the fighter template character here and call collided with projectile hitbox. The logic starts again, but at this point, the speared character will have an invalid character reference. So really what we need to do is bring this logic out just a little bit and check for that is using complex hurt boxes. So we want to get our base game mode reference. We want to check for is using complex hurt boxes, and we want to go into a branch, and if it is false, we're going to do the logic that we had previously set up. If it's true, we are going to call a speared character, and we are going to pass in the same target, but the speared character reference will need to be different, and it will need to be the one off of this cast, the bottom cast, for when using complex hurt boxes is true. So here is my reroute node for that, and it actually stops here. I'm going to drag it in to this speared character ref. I'm going to make another reroute node here, and I'm going to follow a path just so I can organize it a little bit more than it is. And I think a simple way to do this would be to put it here and move down, take damage, and this reroute node Something like that should do the trick. And I will move down these reroute nodes as well. And there we go. Now we have speared character for complex hurt boxes and non-complex hurt boxes. If you're not supporting both types of hitboxes in your game, then you don't need to worry about this. This is really supposed to be an on or off thing, either you're using these hurt boxes or not. But since this is a tutorial series, I do support both, and if we want to support both, we are going to need to do that. Now if we play our game, we can go into practice so we can see everything in action. We can skip everything here, and I can use my spear. If the one character jumps over the spear, the attacker eventually goes back to idle. If the character uses the spear and lands the hit, though, it plays the effect, brings the character in, and then they go into the dazed state. The other character can do this as well. And the same logic happens, so it works from both directions and on both characters. And with all that done, you have the ability to use the spear, like Scorpion's Get Over Here spear throw move in Mortal Kombat. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I hope this helped you make your Get Over Here mechanic in your game, and I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. Again, if you would like to get this series and all the content for free on the Epic Marketplace when it is released, feel free to check out that Patreon like all these kind souls already have. YouTube membership gets the same perks now as the Patreon, so also feel free to check that out if you'd rather support me directly on YouTube instead of on Patreon. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out, and that is completely free. There's a link in the description. Like I said, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.